good people don't smoke marijuana.
I've known Larry for a long time.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. Our love. I got something here for you and me. Oh yeah, it's a medical marijuana. Whoa, whoa, I got something here for you and me. Oh yeah, it's a medical marijuana. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of Medical Marijuana Radio. This week our guest will be David A. Paleschuck, author of the book Branding Bud, which is the commercialization of cannabis. And this is the right time for that book, as you will find out. If you're looking to get into this industry, there's great opportunities in many states around this country, and more, of course, coming on board all the time. So we talked to David about branding your medical cannabis business, and it's quite exciting. So without any further ado, here is our interview with David Paleschuck.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. Our love.
And we're back. Today I have author of Branding Bud, the Commercialization of Cannabis, David Paleschuck, and he's with us. His book is just being released, and it couldn't be at a better time. David, welcome to Medical Marijuana Radio, and how did you get this so timed out perfectly? There's so many new states that are coming on, and so many people that are wanting to get into the cannabis industry. Congratulations on getting this out at this time, and tell me how you did it.
Thank you, Larry. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish I could really take credit for the perfect timing, but I can't. This book took me 5 years to write, and in many ways, because of the things that have changed over the last 5 years, I've had to rewrite it numerous times. And because it's focused on brands, there are brands that either have come and gone within 5 years, or have rebranded, or have a new line of products and new product SKUs. So, the truth is that it's more serendipitous than anything. I wish I could take claim to the perfect timing, but here's what I will share. For the last 2 weeks, the book has been #1 on Amazon in the branding category, and #1 in the green business category on Amazon. To me, that just blows me away. That is beyond anything I ever expected. And again, it's not about me or my book. It truly is about the timing. It truly is about the moment. And I think coming out of the pandemic, with a change in the administration, and New York and some of the other states moving in the direction we need the states to move in, it's serendipitous, and I'm grateful.
Okay, well, that being said, there are a lot of people and going into this industry who don't have a lot of experience in cannabis. There's a wide open businesses that are going to be able to proliferate in many states. Here in New Mexico, we have micro licenses, and in other states they have the same. So, how will branding? Explain this to people who maybe aren't on top of it, and need this education. Tell us about why branding is so important to differentiate yourself from your competition.
Well, I don't think that's so hard to talk through if we just think about how branding is in the in the world that we live in today. Brands differentiate themselves. Well, let's actually back up. Let's start with what a brand is, right? A brand is a promise made, and a consistent follow-up to that promise. And if a brand is able to consistently follow up on the promise they're making, whether it be something about their ingredients that's in their product, or whether it be something totally aspirational and intangible, those are the things that brands, those are the brand pillars and the ethos of a brand So, really, why are brands important? Let's break down just for a moment and look at Coca-Cola. I mean, if we look at the ingredients, we've got carbonated water, caramel color, sugar, a few other things. But at the end of the day, and even look at the assets of Coca-Cola, and you start to get into, not that they own all the bottling companies, but even if you looked at all the machinery and everything else that basically creates Coca-Cola, the truth is Coca-Cola's value is really based on its brand, and based on its acceptance, and that's really what it's all about. And simply put, have a Coke and a smile, right? So it's that sort of aspiration, and consistency, and even
exactly,
right, and even though that consistency might change, think Mexican Coke, for example, or slight variations. And that happens too with cannabis and with varying strains in different states with different brands. There are different preferences in different states for different strains. And I almost liken it to the beverage industry in some ways. Typically, the further you move to the equator or the lower socioeconomic community you talk about, the preference is for a sweeter carbonated beverage. And I think the example of that is the Mexican Coke. Also in this case with the natural sugar, cane sugar. But we see these types of things too in cannabis. There tends to be, in the warmer, sunnier states, if you will, a lean toward a sativa. And in the darker states, or even seasonality amongst strains, we start to see, a lean toward indica. So the brands need to also keep these things in, cannabis brands need to keep these things in mind, as they work through not only their products and the seasonality of their products, but even further, dosing and packaging rules are very different from state to state.
Sure.
So,
let me just jump in for a second, because you mentioned consistency, and I think that's been the biggest problem in the cannabis business over the last 5 years, especially since adult use has been proliferated in many states. You might like a Blue Dream, but there's a lot of factors that go into making that Blue Dream the one that you like. Who grew it, how they grew it. And one time you're going to get Blue Dream and it's going to have 21% THC, and another time it's going to be 17. So consistency really is the problem. And in branding in the real world, not cannabis, when you go and buy a Skippy peanut butter, you know what it's going to taste like, and it's going to taste like that every time. So do you think it will be possible for consistency in this industry? I know people fall in love with brands as a consumer. I consider myself the ultimate consumer. You fall in love with a brand, you go back to a brand. So how will people's branding get to the consistency, and how long will it take in this industry?
Well, okay, so this is really interesting. So now we have to bifurcate this conversation into, are we talking about flower, or are we talking about other form factors?
Right.
So let's do that for a moment. So now, before we even get to flower, let's go the other route. So let's talk about edibles, beverages, transdermal patches, sublingual slips, vape pens, tinctures, so on and so forth, right? So now cannabis becomes an ingredient in these other form factors. And there's an extraction, there's a distillation, there's an isolation, there's other things happening. So I believe as long as the extractor, the manufacturer is aware of the dosing, that at the end of the day, once you get to that point, you've removed the terpenes, you're really down to the THC or some of the cannabinoids. And so as you use that as an ingredient in all of the other products derived from cannabis, I do believe you can start to get and offer that consistency. So, take like a beverage, Can just came out with they're coming out across the country with their microdose products. Pabst Blue Ribbon is in the game. I could name so many other beverages. So once we get into that world, then yes, I totally agree that there is a way to offer consistent products. Now, when we go back to flower, is clearly natural, and by nature it is unique, and in its uniqueness, it could vary, not only across strains, but even, as you just said, amongst the same strain. And you could actually, one season can vary from the next season. Someone could take the two same seeds, and one could be grown indoors, one could be grown outdoors, and you could go down into the nitty gritty. But I believe on that level, flower will be looked upon like wine, for example. And so if you think about wine, there are wine brands, and they offer you, their consistency is offering you quality wines that you can trust, let's say. But built into the wine promise, if you will, is inconsistency. And in some ways, that's what even makes it more special. What a great year this vintage was, and so on and so forth. But that's accepted. Whereas, let's go back to Coca-Cola. If your Coca-Cola varied, or if your Starbucks coffee varied, or if your McDonald's hamburger varied, And when I travel from place to place, on the rare occasion where I end up stopping in a McDonald's, because I grew up in New York, I'm miffed when mustard comes on my on my cheeseburger.
That's
because, right. Because that's not how I grew up. But it is the way people eat it wherever I happen to be, right? So you look for consistency in certain areas, and I think there's this sort of leniency or clemency in other areas because you expect these differences. And so now, when I'm starting to talk about cannabis and the future of cannabis, I'm actually, really bifurcating this conversation and saying, hey, flower is one thing. That's sort of the craft side of the industry. But all this other stuff, transdermal patches, well, they better have the same dose from patch to patch to patch. Otherwise, it's just not going to fly.
Okay, but in that sense, and in that case, a transdermal patch is more medical, as a medical product, although people who don't want to smoke would want to take their cannabis that way, their cannabinoids that way. However, the effect is way different. Okay, do you actually think that transdermal patches will move into the adult world, or do you think it's just a medical product and suppositories and all that kind of stuff? Because one of the problems that we as consumers and patients of medical cannabis is concerned, those type of products are disappearing when adult use is proliferated. So how do you think the medical is going to withstand adult use?
Well, that's a great question, Larry. And so let's start off. I agree with you that a transdermal patch in and of itself, because of its form factor and what it, in and of itself, because of its form factor, physical form factor, but then all the other things that are built into it and around it, right? The way it looks like a Band-Aid or a Nicorette patch. It's packaged like, as such, a Band-Aid. Again, we're taking all these other thoughts from medicinal products and rolling them into this particular form factor. Like, hey, it's a patch. It looks like a Band-Aid. It must function like a Band-Aid. And therefore, I need to associate all these other things that are associated with Band-Aids, like medicinal use and all these others. But, and all these other associations. But the thing that I would at least throw out as part of the conversation and think is worthy of discussing is, let's talk about consumers for a minute. Consumers come in all different shapes and sizes and have all different sorts of rituals and need states. Some of those need states are they're a patient, they're a medical patient, and they need to alleviate their pain. Others are adult use, others are maybe somewhere in between, therapeutic, let's say. But but nonetheless, as consumers, so I always look at consumers first and say, what are their need states? And then even think about further through the pandemic. And you think about how many parents are home with their kids, how many families or groupings of people are together that may cohabitate and now are or have been for the last year together. So maybe smoking a joint or smoking a bong or smoking a pipe isn't something they could do anymore. So they need to look for these discrete means of consumption. And so the other thing that I always look at, and again, I kind of bifurcate, is, are we talking about discrete cannabis products or non-discrete cannabis products? And I actually believe people potentially have swung over to discrete or more discrete cannabis use during the pandemic because they're around, loved ones that maybe they just can't share that with, or it's just not part of their daily use or consumption pattern. But I think things have changed over the last year. I think people are thinking about consuming cannabis in different ways. I think certainly Ellen DeGeneres coming on her show, a few weeks back, talking about Can and how this is the new microdosed cannabis beverage that everybody's got to try. Another celebrity, Chelsea Handler, also mentioned Can. So I think people will start to look at cannabis in a different way than they have. Mm-hmm. And I think those that smoke will also look to try it in new and different ways. And I think those that consume alcohol or other products, they'll also seek to, maybe move away from alcohol, maybe mm-hmm. try something different. And I think that will normalize it.
Sure. But here's what's going to happen in my prediction anyway, my thoughts, unless we figure out how to fix this. The big brands, the people that are branding their stuff, they're going to look at their SKU and they're going to see what's selling, what's not selling, and then they're going to start eliminating stuff. Okay. And I'm thinking that medical products will be eliminated. We've seen it in other states. Now, here in New Mexico, we're very lucky. Something I campaigned for the last 5 years was to give licensees a choice to be medical, just rec, or both. Okay. And we've passed something like that here. You will be able to get a medical only license, plus micro licenses as well. So that being said, is there a difference in branding a handcrafted micro business and branding a big corporate business? Do you think that the technique is different, or is it just about your brand and what you offer to the consumer?
Yeah, I definitely think, well, I could start off by saying to a certain degree, branding is branding. But when you start to get down to, a mass market product versus, in this case, what could potentially be a medicinal product, or let's even call it a craft product, right? I think the messaging is different. I think the tone is different. I think there's a real connection. Whereas, like, again, a Coke may be, may talk about have a Coke and a smile, which is this sort of, it's a hook, of course, but it's this massive hook. It's like, who doesn't want to smile? Who doesn't want to feel good? But, but when you're down at the craft level, or even the medicinal cannabis level, you're talking to people, almost at the one-on-one level about their ailments and their needs, and sort of, comforting them. And so I think it's different. It definitely it takes more hand-holding. The other one is big budgets, but the other one, I think, in the craft and medical space might take more education and handholding.
Uh-huh. So I'm going to be a little self-serving right now because I believe that domain names are really, really important for branding. I think that's how you get people to your website to if you're, a place where you can shop from and so forth or get information. So do you cover how important domain names are in your book, Branding Bud?
I don't. No, I don't. And what's interesting is, but it's something I think about in my consultancy and how I work with my clients. I have always been a proponent of, getting the right URL and spending more for it to get it right. But Larry, to a large degree, you know what I've seen lately, and especially during the pandemic, is people are using QR codes. And so to a large extent, their ability to just, pull out their phone, hit a QR code or a barcode and be taken to a website is, I believe in many ways, somehow diminishes that final destination. Again, hey, my website is brandingbud.com. And, so, I could argue both sides of the coin, but I think this ability to, to show your phone at something and it to take you somewhere, when I say something, a barcode or QR code, I think now there's a number of brands that I've seen lately that said, nah, we won't spend the $10,000 on that website. We'll get a different suffix or we'll change it up a little bit, and we won't pay for the domain we really wanted. I'm starting to see that a little bit. Yeah. Is that something you've noticed?
I hope not. I don't want to notice that. I've done pretty well over the last few years before the pandemic. I really haven't been promoting my 250 or so names. I'm starting to get into that now, but wow. I do find I've never sold anything under 5,000. That I can tell you. So I think that my personal opinion, because I've invested, over the last 15 to 18 years on domain names for the cannabis industry exclusively. So I think it's the best way for someone to remember how to get to your product. I mean, if somebody wants CBD capsules, they can go to cbdcapsules.com. That sounds like I think I'll remember that. The QR code thing is interesting. I don't use QR codes. Of course, I'm 70 years old and I'm not, I think young. And I feel young, but I don't think I've ever scanned a QR code at Sam's Club or Walmart or some other store to get information on it. But is that the trend that you're seeing?
Absolutely. Now, yeah. In fact, I'm working with a company right now, which, believe it or not, their logo is their QR code. So when you could just pull out your phone and just shine it right onto their can and be pulled right off to their website, where they can tell you, all their wonderful, fantastic stories about, their product.
Sure.
And not only that, they could drive people to different places, different pages based on that QR code. So if there's a different flavor, they could take you to, a different landing page for each flavor. So yes, I have seen that as a trend. Where people are, at least many of the people I've been working with in and outside of the cannabis industry, where they're saying, hey, we for example, maybe they'll have a brand, and they'll put buy in front of their brand name, or they'll do different things. One example in the cannabis space or somewhat cannabis space is really interesting is True Terpenes, if you're familiar with them.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, so True Terpenes sells terpenes to the cannabis industry. But what's interesting is their domain name is buyterpenesonline.com. So, and that in itself is a pretty interesting strategy. Like change or get get the URL that people are searching for, not necessarily the search results from what people are searching for, if that makes sense.
The keywords that people are searching for.
Right.
I think
Right.
the other night in one of the clubhouse rooms, I think it was you that brought up some keywords that you had some statistics on. Was that you the other day or someone else?
Yes, that was in my
Was you?
book. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's an important statistic. I mean, so do you think that using the by in front of a name or an extra long name is more for undercapitalized people? And do you think that corporations really should spend the bucks to get the one that they need? Like, should Pepsi get CBDcola.com? Or
Yeah.
or their biggest competitor?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think, I think, man, the jury's out on that one. Let me tell you a story.
Please.
When I was at Microsoft, and I was recruited from New York to join Microsoft when they were developing Zune. Zune, for those that don't know what Zune was, in 2006, Microsoft developed an MP3 player, which was going to compete with the iPod. And in January of 2017 or thereabouts, 2007, thereabouts, a few months later, Apple came out with the iPhone. And therefore the Zune MP3 player, Microsoft Zune MP3 player, kind of went down the tubes. And then morphed into, and then of course Microsoft bought Nokia, and and then Windows Mobile Phone came about, and so on and so forth. But I tell you this story because there was an owner of Zune.com who lived in Israel, and when he heard that Microsoft was coming out with a product called Zune, and wanted Zune, Z-U-N-E, and wanted to purchase it, he asked for an exorbitant amount, and basically Microsoft told him to take a hike, and went with Zune.net instead. But their original desire was to get Zune.com. That was the brand. That was their brand, just like Xbox is their brand.
Sure.
So that's an example of where a large corporation, where the couple of $1 million that the guy was asking for was chump change to Microsoft. But they were still not willing to pay it. And, I just think that's just an interesting scenario where one didn't. But look, at the end of the day, the cannabis industry is hot, and it's only getting hotter. When the big boys come in, the big boys and girls come in, they should be doing the things they do in the normal world, and and if they're smart, and if they see the value in it, they will do things like that and make those purchases.
Okay, let's get back to the book a little bit. You mentioned packaging before, okay? That packaging is important to your brand. I've seen a lot of packaging out there that I think are just amateurish. They're just amateur. They're just so loaded up with colors and things that's sort of distracting of what is actually in that package. Packaging design, what are your thoughts on that?
What are my thoughts on that? Again, I always start off with the cannabis consumer, right? So what you just said is interesting, because you just spoke about an overwhelming feeling of information on a package that's all over the place. But you also said earlier, you pointed out your age. And so I truly believe that packaging relates back to not only people's ages, but their genders and all the things that they're, that we have, right? All the things that make up who we are, our choices and all the things that make up who we are. So that said, I think packaging runs the gamut, just like it does in consumer packaged goods. I think there's different types of consumers that desire different types of packaging. And so, to that end, the book, really starts to sort of, the plot thickens in the book, if you will, around the 14 cannabis brand archetypes. And so what I've done over the last 11 years since I've been in the industry is looked at brands and studied brands, and quite frankly, have bucketed brands into what I call our brand archetypes. And first, let me call out what a brand archetype is for just those that don't understand it. A brand archetype categorizes universal patterns that we intuitively know, helping us to quickly understand a brand's point of view. And as such, these brand archetypes are effective marketing shortcuts, and they embody these common elements that we immediately understand. So applying these elements, to a brand helps potential customers identify and understand it immediately. So, that said, let me just run through a couple of different types of brand archetypes. And so there's 14. They are not mutually exclusive. They often overlap. And I'll go through a couple of examples. And I would also say, if anybody has another brand archetype that they want to share, I'm interested in it. This is what I do, and this is what I love. So I'm not here to say, no, there's only 14. That's it. This is what David says. I'm here to look at this as a study in marketing and branding and better understanding how and why consumers choose the products they do. So with that, let me just run through a couple of things. So these are the brand archetypes: cultivator, gender, foodie, health and wellness, counterculture, prohibition, nostalgic, charity, luxury, value, art and design, regional, novelty, and celebrity.
Celebrity.
So let me give you one example of where, a celebrity brand kind of runs off into something else, into a gender brand. So the brand Whoopi and Maya, with Whoopi Goldberg and her friend Maya, they have a brand which is focused on women's needs, anything from PMS to fibromyalgia to some other things, but basically geared toward women. So this is not only a health and wellness brand, it's a gender-based brand, and it's a celebrity brand, right? And so I've created these archetypes because these are the way that marketers and brands speak efficiently and effectively to the consumers that are interested in their products. And whether it's color, whether it's font, whether I could go through, whether it's words, there's so many different things that, that sort of come into play, and if a brand knows sooner, or rather knows who their customer is and knows what they want to convey, and the sooner they do that, they're more likely to bring on loyal customers.
Mm-hmm. Is that a niche brand?
Well, sure.
Yeah.
It's a niche brand. A brand archetype might be a little bit more broader than that, but yeah, absolutely. Let me use the luxury brand as an example. There's a brand out of Washington here called Lyra Cannagars. They make cigars which are made out of cannabis, called Cannagars. They come in the varying sizes that cigars do. But then they also come in gold-plated and platinum-plated, which you can smoke. And, they sell for thousands of dollars. And people come in, on their private planes into Boeing Field to pick up these Cannagars a few at a time on their way to Vegas. And to me, that's very niche, right? One, who can afford that? Two, when someone spends that kind of money on a Cannagar, they're not smoking it with themselves, right? They're flaunting it. It's a baller brand. It's a luxury brand. It's a status brand. So more often than not, they place themselves in a certain situation where they could say, hey, look what I've got, or where people could see what they've got. And so, brands exist for different reasons. A health and wellness brand is almost let's say the exact opposite of that, right? A health and wellness brand is about, how do I feel? How do I take care of myself? What do I do, for preventative means and for therapeutic means, how do I alleviate some of the pain and the ailments I'm feeling? That's completely different than, hey, look at me, look at this $5,000 platinum plated cannabis cigar I'm smoking, right? So brands and products serve different needs, and depending on who we are, where we are in life, and where our place is in life, we choose certain brands. There's other brands like Besito out of LA, which is really gender specific, focuses on the LGBTQ community, offers a portion of their proceeds to charities that support the LGBT and BIPOC communities. So there's that, or Farmer and a Felon, right, which is more like I would say more of a charity leaning brand, because a portion of their proceeds goes to the Last Prisoner Project. And they, and even through the coloration of their packaging, it's bright fluorescent orange and white striped packaging with, almost black stenciled words on it, basically mimicking the uniform of a prisoner. Right. So that's their whole message. So it's just really interesting to see how brands can leverage their packaging, their brand names, and all the assets that they create to tie into communities in meaningful ways.
So obviously California is ahead of the game, because they started everything in 1996 with the acceptance of cannabis for medical uses. And then for some reason, they weren't the first to legalize for adult use. But how long will it take other states to catch up to California, where everything usually starts first? I mean, there's a different mindset. I know New York is going to be a huge state. Illinois already is a huge state. So will the multi-state operators really be always be the biggest brands, or do you think local brands have a shot against them?
Well, I think right now it's the local brands that are really leading. I don't think, certainly where I spend most of my time, it's not about MSO brands. That's not to say it won't become that, but I still think there's a need for local brands. I also I've seen brands from California, Orange County in particular, come up to Washington and just fail. Fail because they just. Forgive me for saying this. I've used this term a couple of times, but the bikini brands just don't make it up here in the Pacific Northwest. So there's different brands that have different appeal, and often, they're regional appeals. I mean, it's funny, when I usually talk about regional brands, I talk about the Emerald Triangle, and I talk about, the comparison to champagne or cognac in France, and that sort of thing. But in this case, I'm talking more about, how a brand that's, like an Orange County brand just sort of makes it outside of Southern California, and how that lands in certain ways. And it's just interesting to see that.
So you didn't mention that brand, and you don't have to, but was there a way for that brand to be successful up there, or was that just a bad idea?
Well, for one, I don't think they came in with the marketing dollars they need, and they're a really big brand. So I don't think that when they cut the deal with their licensee here in Washington State, I just don't think they thought through what it would take to market their brand. But even further, and I won't mention the brand, but for sure, if you look on Instagram right now, you just see these posts, with bikini clad girls, at the beach, smoking on a vape pen or some other products. And, there's just lists of all the people that are commenting or, and commenting in a positive way. But, I often wonder, like, are they really commenting on the product, or are they commenting on how cute this girl is, in her bikini? And so again, and I guess too, I could even add, does it really matter? In this case, if that's what the consumer is attracted to, then maybe that's all that matters, and if they keep on coming back because this brand keeps on, hiring models, bikini models to promote their brand, then sure, then that's what it's about for these loyal customers. I know it's different in the Pacific Northwest. That just doesn't, it's just not, it's not a hook that, that people from the Pacific Northwest respond to positively.
Well, the Pacific Northwest has always had a bad feeling about Californians who move up there. So I think that might have been not such a great idea anyway. I think there's some. Do you feel that? I mean, do you hear that about Washington and Oregon, that they don't like Californians coming up to their state? I mean, this has been going on since the 70s when all the hippies were moving up there. So I happen to feel that they're more accepting now, but it might not have been a good idea for a Southern California company to go up there. But so okay, we talked about the multi-state operators. How long do you think the niche market will have? Do you think if you really put your head down and you go in your lane and you're doing handcrafted stuff and premium quality products, do you think that they can go up against the multi-state operators? Or is it just a foregone conclusion that eventually it's not going to be good?
No, again, I'll separate this conversation into flour and other products.
Right. Okay. I get. Let's forget about flour. Flour is so inconsistent that it's going to be a long time before that. I mean, there'll be premium growers. There will be. That's where I'm going to go. But the other products, I think, really can be consistent because 50 milligrams of THC is 50 milligrams of THC. However, your ingestion method can give different effects. That 50 milligrams on a patch, like we were talking about earlier, is going to feel different than a 50 milligram canna capsule or pieces of candy. So I do feel that dosing obviously is real important to your brand, and specific instructions need to be on there because you might have the greatest edible in the world, just from a great chef and everything, but if you don't teach your consumer how to use it properly, they're going to have it once and they're not going to go back to it because they're going to have one of those bad edible experiences. So educating your consumer, you have to educate them. My feeling is you have to know what they want and give it to them, and they'll come back to you. Does that make sense in your branding knowledge?
Absolutely. So I have, it's funny. You heard the show last night where Jason Pinsky spoke about the Pinsky triangle.
Yeah.
And what's funny is I have these three things that I always put together. So now I might coin this the Paleschuck triangle. But here's basically how I approach it. If I understand the consumer and what the consumer wants and have a better understanding of the consumer's lifestyle and need states and rituals, which means either discrete products or non-discrete products, maybe they're a patient and they put a patch on, maybe they use a slip, maybe they're not a patient, but they can't go out at lunch and smoke a joint because they'll come back smelling like weed. So, they need to use a sublingual slip. But whatever those rituals are, usage patterns and need states, if you understand what they are, then that leads immediately into the form factor. Like, okay, cool. We know this person smokes, we could develop a product for them. We know this person doesn't smoke. What's the best product for them? And then of course it gets into the uptake, right? The bioavailability and the uptake. And then, and of course that has everything to do with dosing. So if we move from cannabis consumer to form factor and then to brand, we can overlay the brand archetypes and say, okay, now that we know So let's just say, let me use this as an example. We've got, let me go through a ritual or need state. We've got 5 kids skateboarding at a skateboard park. They're 17-year-old boys. All of a sudden, 6th kid rolls up. He's like, "Hey dudes, I've got a joint. Let's smoke." They smoke. The smoke wafts across the park over to the swings. The mothers are looking across. They're scowling at the kids smoking at the skateboard park. The kids, 17-year-old kids, look back at the moms like, "Ah, fuck you, moms." That's what 17-year-old kids do, and then they go skateboard. Now, that's all about the time and place in their life, the rituals that they do, the things that a 17-year-old skateboarder boy does, right? It's counterculture. It's all those types of things. Think of that same situation for a moment. The 6th kid comes up and says, "Hey guys, I got these transdermal patches. Let's put them on our arms and get wasted." It just doesn't even play into the picture, right? It just doesn't even, so the wafting smoke across the park, getting the moms pissed, is part of these 17-year-old boys. It's what they do. It's part of who they are at that point in their life. Just like not getting stoned at lunch or smoking a joint and smelling like weed and coming back into the office where everybody looks at you and says, "Oh my God, Charlie, what did you just do at lunch?" Right? So at certain points in our life, we have different responsibilities and different ways that we act, and therefore different rituals and different form factors serve us. And so, a counterculture brand or a celebrity brand that might appeal to us when we're 17 might not be the same place where we are when we're 70 and are looking at a health and wellness brand or a nostalgic brand or something of those sorts. So I really think it's that triad of who's your consumer, what form factor do they need to basically work with their ritual or need states, and then how do we serve that up and speak their language, so to speak, on these brand archetypes. And once you roll those all up together, then you have a brand that, and a product and a form factor that serves a customer. And that's how I've basically approached it in the book. That's how I approach my typically consultations to, cannabis companies or to those that are getting into the cannabis industry. It's more asking the hard questions. Who are you appealing to? What are you trying to accomplish? And in order to come out with a great product, you need to have those answers.
Right. Well, David, we're talking today to David Paleschuck with his book Branding Bud, The Commercialization of Cannabis. And David, I just want to keep you for another couple minutes, but where can people get the book today if they want it? I know it's available everywhere, but where's a great place to get it?
A great place to get it is on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, or Books A Million.
Books A Million. Wow,
Yes.
That's great. I haven't heard of them in a while. That's great that they're still there. So, David, before we wrap up, what is one thing that we didn't talk about that is in your book that's really important for people wanting to get into this industry?
Well, I think the one thing that's important that we didn't talk about is, and I'll make it brief, is, why the stereotypes exist today around cannabis. And when I open up in the book, I talk about basically from prohibition moving forward, talking about aspects of pop culture, whether it starts off with Cheech and Chong and rolls all the way through to, Weeds or Harold and Kumar or Fast Times at Ridgemont High, or into Snoop and all the other celebrities that sort of represent the culture today. And I talk about that and why that has caused us to be where we are today, and why people think of cannabis, they relate cannabis with tie-dyed and stoners and all the other things that, quite frankly, are just wrong.
Like peace and love?
like peace and love.
Well, anyway, David, thank you. I wish you peace and love, of course. And David's book, Branding Bud, The Commercialization of Cannabis, is available at Amazon, Books A Million, and Barnes & Noble. David, thank you very much for your time today. And before we go, promote your Clubhouse shows and times so that people that are on Clubhouse and the new Android people that are going to be coming on soon will be able to listen to you.
Right on. Thank you, Larry. Well, on Monday nights, I host Monday nights from 8 to 10 Pacific Standard Time. I host one-on-one interviews with some of the best-known brands and their owners. And we talk about the backstory of their company and the brand and who they serve and why they're in the business. And then on Friday nights, again, from 8 to 10 Pacific Standard Time, we have a Friday night free flow where we just bring on a lot of brand owners, a lot of people in the industry, influencers, and we chat about pretty much what's taken place over the course of the week in cannabis. And we love it. It's really exciting, and we do it every week, Mondays and Fridays.
I've enjoyed it myself, and I thank you for giving people your expertise. And again, the book is Branding Bud, The Commercialization of Cannabis, available at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and Amazon. David Paleschuck, thank you very much for being on Medical Marijuana Radio today. We'll be right back after this.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love.
Well, I want to thank my guest, David Paleschuck. Check out his book, Branding Bud, for sure. I also want to thank my two radio mentors, both of the initials HS. And also check out my Clubhouse show called Late Night with Larawana. That's on Friday and Saturday nights at midnight East Coast and 10 in New Mexico and 9 in the Pacific time zone. Also, check out the cannachannel.com on Facebook, and we'll be back next week.